So I've gotten this question a lot of times, Andrea, why Albania? And the true answer is I don't know. That is 100% gospel truth, and I'm going to talk to you today about the path that I have traveled in order to be headed toward Albania. Um, when we When I'm talking today, I'm going to be telling my story. This is kind of a testimonial, a little bit, of how God has worked in my life. It will sound like my story, but I want to make sure that you know that I am nothing special. I am nothing special. This is totally the story of God's story in me, and I really hope that comes clear today when I'm sharing these pictures and stories of my life and why Albania. So to start off, I'm telling you, we're going way back. We're going to start off with young Andrea. When I was 18 months old, the military moved my dad to Germany. I didn't realize the significance of this at the time, but later as I grew up, my first experiences, my first memories were all of different languages, different cultures, different people, different places. I learned that the church is family. I learned that the church is all over the world. I learned that there is more than just English and the United States and the American flag. And I think this was a part of forming me that God had a plan in that I didn't even know. When I was six, almost six, we moved to the States. And because, again, of my dad being in the military, we moved multiple places over my childhood. And when I was 12, we ended up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and then later we ended up in the Valley. There were some times that we would visit at churches and they would be very healthy churches, very active, very vibrant churches, and there'd be other times we visit churches that were sick, that were struggling, that needed help. And in each place we saw how the body of Christ worked. Mostly my parents, me as a side. We participated in the church. The church was family. We were committed, and it was a learning experience too, seeing the body of Christ everywhere we went. Sometimes I would be really lonely, and I would have moved away from friends just recently, and my mom would sometimes say, maybe God wants you to be a missionary someday. Maybe this loneliness and this dealing with being away from friends is training for you, that he wants you to do something else for him. I used to read the book of Esther a lot. It was one of my favorite books when I was little, and I loved her when Mordecai told her, maybe you were called for such a time as this. And I kept wondering if there was going to be such a time as this and for my life, where there was something that he had planned special for me. As I grew older, I realized that I had been incredibly blessed. I was born into a family that loved God and raised me to love God. Most kids don't get that. I was born into a family that was committed to taking care of me and giving me a safe home. And I remember my mom quoting this scripture. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. When you pull in somebody who has been saved by the skin of their teeth, maybe their life has been a struggle and they have, just barely found God, and you bring them in, and there's such a beautiful testimony and story in that. And I honor and respect everyone and their path to God, and he has a plan. But when God gives you something from babyhood and says and instills in you all of this information, and there's this feeling I have that he wants something from me, that there's something that I'm not supposed to sit back in my comfortable little life and just soak in all this Bible knowledge and that he's given me, but that maybe it's time to share it back, that it's time to pass it on and do something else. When I was 14, I heard a missionary talk about Magadan, Russia. This is in Fairbanks, Alaska. It's not going to work over here. Magadan, Russia is right here. It's like as close as you can get over to Alaska and the United States as you can possibly get in Russia. And I was really excited by this idea, this place that had just recently opened up to missionaries, and people were hungry for the gospel and for truth. And something about that just captured my attention and my imagination. And I decided at that age that I was going to go and be a missionary in Russia someday. I didn't know how it was going to happen. I didn't know how that was going to work out, but that's what I really, really wanted to do. And then at 17 years old, I had an opportunity to take a Russian class, and I was still committed to this plan of being a missionary in Russia. And so I took Russian classes, and this is where God he has a sense of humor, I think. Because when I went to this Russian class, just at the Matsu College down the road, this quiet kid who wouldn't talk to me in teen class because he was just so shy, ended up taking the exact same Russian language class with me over at Matsu College. And it's funny because I think about that class. Like, I was a homeschool kid, he was a public schools kid. There was no reason for us to be in a college class at the same time. I was 17, he hadn't graduated high school yet. And yet we ended up in this Russian class. And by the end of our Russian class, I had learned a little bit of Russian, and I now had a sweetheart. And James became my best friend through this whole adventure, and we both were learning Russian together. When I was 18, I heard about this program. This is another but God. Like, I did not know a single aimer. I had never been to Texas or visited Sunset or visited AIM. I'd never been to Camp Adventure. I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. And we really shouldn't have heard about AIM. But a Harding recruiter told my mom about AIM. And when she heard about this program that was designed for young graduates of high school and college-age kids who wanted to go into mission work, who went off and committed 3 years of their lives to doing mission work, I knew that this was what I was supposed to do. I just knew. When we went to AIM, people would ask, so what made you decide, or who was your influencer? And I'm like, there was no decision point. Like, I knew. And it was really bizarre because my little brother Isaac was 2, and he was my best friend and my shadow, and I did everything with him, and I carried him around all over the place, and I spent all this time with him, and I was his second mom, and walking away from him was one of the hardest things I had ever done. But God didn't give me the option of, do I do this? Do I not do this? I just knew that this was where I was supposed to go. And because I went and had an experience there, I'm just incredibly blessed to see the ripples in the pond that have gone out as more and more and more other young teenagers have heard about it in Alaska, and the things that they have done have so far outpaced things that I have done and my experiences. But I'm just so glad that God gave me that opportunity to drop in the pond, and watching the ripples is just beautiful. So it's really hard to quantify how much AIM changed everything for me. When we send off these young aimers, some of them have everyone has more experience with the AIM program than I do. I had none. I knew nothing. We showed up, and it was just this exuberant ball of youth group energy, and everybody was just like bouncing off the walls and super excited, and I was just like, what have I done? Like, I came from this really tiny youth group. I was a very studious, very serious person. I did not know what I was doing. I'm like, why am I doing here? James says it was the biggest culture shock of his life, even over Ukraine. And I think that might be true for me too. going from Alaska to Texas was just a huge culture shock. Be constantly surrounded by people, but also have your faith challenged daily, like just constantly. They weren't allowed to just hear a nice lesson and walk off and forget it. You repeated it. You talked about it. You went from small groups and Bible study and it was all day, every day. And God was just working on us and molding us and shaping us and pushing us out of our comfort zone over and over again. They still tell the story at every AIM class that comes back. So they pull you back for mid-cycle review and ask to see what you could do better as an aimer. And when they pulled me back into the room, they said, Andrea, you're doing great in all your classes, but we have one assignment for you. We want you to get a B in one of your classes. You are you are a little too studious. This is not all about the academics. This is a lot about people and about working with other people. And so we want you to get a B. And I did. I got a B on a test. I got an A in the class. But anyway, anyway. And then I marvel at this. The most amazing thing happened. From the time I was 14, I knew that I wanted to go to Russia. When I got to AIM, there was an AIM field in Russia. And that AIM field was not in Magadan, Russia, which I thought I wanted. It was all the way over here in Moscow, Russia. It was literally 12-hour time zones away from Alaska. And at first I was disappointed, but God knew. It was an amazing place full of culture and beauty. And whenever I would get discouraged or blue or feel homesick, I would just go downtown on the metro and get off and walk onto Red Square. And I would be reminded of God's amazing providence and planting this seed in my heart and bringing me to this place. Again, this is not Andrea's amazing. This is God works in us and does amazing things. I didn't know I was going to be the absolute last AIM team to Russia to this day. Like, there have not been any more AIM teams to Russia. And with the way things are going, Lydia told me last night, I want to be an aimer in Russia. I'm like, well, God's going to have to work a pretty big miracle for that to happen. But I guess if God is working that plan out, he can do it. So my team and I left the day after Mother's Day. The day before Mother's Day, I learned that I was going to be a big sister again, and that was Adam. I arrived and joined this team. So it's David, and these two girls in this end, Miracle and Becca, were already there in Russia. And Melody, me, Seth, and Brian were the newcomers to the team. We are wearing LS t-shirts. That means Let's Start Talking. They were having summer campaigns. The first thing I did actively was stood at metro stations, handing out flyers to people getting off the metro. We wanted people to come who were interested in learning English classes. And I don't know what time it is. Okay, we're still going to. We wanted people to come who wanted to learn English lessons. We worked with them and all summer long, these people. Yes, we use the Bible as the text. A very simple, easy to read Bible. People who were interested in the Bible and had some proficiency in English at the end ended up working with us through the winter. We did all kinds of fun and crazy campaigns that summer to keep people interested, to bring in Russian Christians and connect them with the Russian non-Christians. We taught English Bible classes all through the school year while we were learning Russian and trying to understand better. We visited a children's hospital. We had small groups. We had young adult groups. Our team worked with the young adults, while the older team worked with the youth mostly. We worked at a handicapped institute. We worked wherever we could, and we had schedules that we filled every week, and they were full of activities and things that we did while we worked there. Our time there was not easy. We were there during 9/11. Our coordinator's wife ended up going to the States for the summer, but found out she had cancer and didn't end up coming back until Christmas for her treatment. Our team dynamics, we struggled sometimes with that. We dealt with terrorism in Moscow. Communication was really hard with the States. We didn't have the cell phones. It was pre-cell phone. Nobody had cell phones. We did a lot of stuff, a lot of time wasted without cell phones. Yeah, this is 2001, 2003. And then we graduated. Oh, wait, that's Estonia. We went up to, James did this. We got, one of the cool things about that I wanted to mention is that while we were in Russia, we did get to go to other places where missionaries gathered. And it was very encouraging to see families, to see people who were serving God in different places in Eastern Europe. Met some lifelong friends that way. This was our AIM graduation. We wore traditional Russian outfits, except for Brian. Oh, that didn't either. Anyway, just, I guess us girls did. When we came back, it was a challenge. I really feel for AIM students who get off the field. It's finding your purpose again, finding your team again, finding God again is a challenge. And people have a hard time understanding what it meant to do what you did, where you lived, where you worked. People have caricatures in their head of Russia, and that's what they assume my life was. People had a hard time seeing what a young unmarried woman could be useful in ministry, and it was hard to find a place again. And then I got to go visit James on his AIM field in Ukraine. His field felt fresh and familiar but fresh. Ukrainians were warmer and more welcoming than Muscovites. Where I had to advertise English lessons to bring people in, he was able to advertise Bible lessons, and people came flocking in, and they just used translators a lot because people didn't speak English, but they wanted to know hope and the gospel so badly. It was on that trip that I knew that James and I were going to be together forever. When we came back, we worked really hard with the young adult group and the youth group, and he kind of grabbed my hand and just ran, and I kind of ran with him, and got us both out of the funk of not knowing what our purpose was. We got married, and then we immediately went back kind of on our summer honeymoon. I took him to Red Square in St. Petersburg, and it was really special. Then we graduated, and we had babies. And while we were settling into our life, we made sure to tell our kids about mission work and tell them about loving God. And I think our kids have a heart for loving people and telling them about God. And as our family got busier and more, we really focused on 1 Thessalonians 4:11 and 12. Make it your ambition to leave a quiet life. You should mind your own business, work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders and do what you will not be dependent on anybody. This seemed to be the next step of our life, to just do the next thing. The next thing, James was working in his career. I had everything I wanted. I had babies, I had a house, I could homeschool them because he worked outside the home. I had everything, but something for both of us felt like it was missing. We reached a crisis point when James was asked to take on another deacon role, and we realized that we didn't have the capacity to serve further. Anything else that he gave would steal time from the kids and I, because his job took so much. And I want to quickly read over in John 21. When Jesus comes back from the dead and he's talking to Peter and John, he does the whole feed my sheep thing with Peter. And then in verse 20, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This is the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" which we know is John. When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Oh, and Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive..." Oh, hold on. Okay, going back to verse 18. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger and dressed yourself and went there you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. And Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? And Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that his disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And this is a weird scripture to pull out. But what I want to focus on is God has a path for each one of us. God has a path for each one of us. God, put it in my 14-year-old heart that I wanted to go to Russia, and he brought me this awesome husband through Russian and AIM and on all of that. He does not call every single one of us to do the same thing. I am seeing more and more that God calls us into different roles, that God has a different purpose in our lives, that we will find peace when we follow his purpose. We will find turmoil and frustration and hardship when we ignore his purpose. And what we were finding in our life was that we were trying to follow a path that was not our path. And it was leading to frustration, it was leading to depression, it was leading to lots of different things. We talked, we prayed, we dreamed, we talked again, and we decided to take our family to Ukraine. We wanted to go and join this group of people at UBI, Ukrainian Bible Institute. James's good friend and teammate, Brandon, there in the middle of the white shirt, he did not stop being active on the Ukrainian mission field when the AIM time ended. He went back, got his sunset degree, and went back. And now he is director, president, whatever you want to call it, of Ukrainian Bible Institute. And I said, James, you are a teacher. You're a talented teacher. You could work helping Brandon for a time. We could see how our family does in mission work for a year. We could go for 10 months for a school year. We could, and for the first time, all of the times I'd thrown up crazy plans like, let's move to China, let's RV all over the States. Something rang true about this idea, and we were both finally ready for it. And we called and talked with Brandon. We got his okay. We talked to some other people, and they were supportive and encouraging. And we thought, this is a good thing. We'll just rent our house or loan our house out for 10 months. We'll see how our family does with all this, and we'll just tiptoe into this life. And then February 24th, 2022 happened, and Putin invaded. And it's really hard for me to convey how much this has changed everything. And I kept telling James as we were watching the bombs fall, as we're following people scrambling to get to safety, I kept telling James, this is not about us. This is not about us. This is not about us. We were praying constantly for the comfort and safety of the people we knew. And I don't understand why. And God has taught me a lot in the last few months about suffering, about pain and loss, and I still don't completely understand it. I have a lot of stories I could share with you, and I have a lot of lessons that the Ukrainian Christians have taught me over these past few months. But one of the cities hardest hit was that beautiful city of Mariupol, where James served as an aimer for those 22 months. And the Christians literally lived in the church building that James helped to renovate from a kindergarten to this church building. It was bombed. It had no running water. It had no electricity. And 33 Christians were living there. They had no source of food. They had to go out and scavenge for food. And these people are the people that James worked with in his time there. This is during the bombs falling. And I have an article here. While we were following them, all we knew is that there was no communication. Everything just completely shut off and went silent. James had been texting people and communicating with people from this hallway, and all of a sudden there was nothing because the Russians had blown up all the towers and for the ability for people to communicate. There was no aid. They tried to send aid and food in many times. All the stores were empty. The things that didn't sell were taken by desperate people needing to survive. And hundreds of people, thousands of people were dead. They had to bury them in mass graves. Bodies were left in rubble because there was no time to get them out, and they were just shelled constantly. This article was in the Christian Chronicle, and I'm going to read you part of it. Keep praying, Sasha. Huddled in a hallway as bombs reduced the Ukrainian city to rubble, members of the Mariupol Church of Christ urged Alexander Chekalenko, Sasha, to call on the Lord for protection. When they stopped, they could hear the gunfire, the explosion, so Sasha kept praying. Or he read Psalms 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Soon the children had it memorized. For 51 days, the church members lived in the darkest of valleys, Mariupol, the Ukrainian port city, obliterated by the forces of Russia and the separatist Donetsk People's Republic. At least 21,000 civilians have died, Ukrainian officials said, and 95% of the city was destroyed. At night, you could hear the planes all night, every night, says Zhenya Kapushka, who's sheltered in the church building with his wife. Anyone who's read James's stories, Zhenya was the guy who gave James the sweater. Olya and two of their children. The whole building would shake. When those really loud shellings would happen, we would sit in the hallway of the building. We would sing louder than the shelling. As many as 33 people ranging in age from 9 months to mid-70s took shelter in the church's meeting place just a few miles from Azovstal steel plant, where the 3-month siege ended on May 20th as the city fell to the Russians. More than 1,200 miles northwest of Mariupol, a half dozen of the church's members, now refugees, gathered around a kitchen table in an apartment attached to the Sopot Church of Christ. The Polish congregation is housing more than 50 refugees of its facility here, just a short walk from the Baltic Sea. In their native language, the Russian and Eastern Ukrainians spoke with the Christian Chronicle about their 7-week ordeal and the long exodus that followed. Interpreting for them was Brandon Price, the former missionary to Ukrainian cities, including Mariupol, and James's teammate. Throughout the interview, Price paused from translating to hug the Mariupol Christians as they entered the kitchen. For more than a month, the missionary didn't know if they were even alive. Price and his fellow refugees, plus a host of Ukrainians across Europe and the U.S., connected through social media, prayed fervently for their safety. That's what sustained us, Olya Kopsha said. That's why we're here. Olya was at work on February 24th when her teenage daughter called her. Shelling had started and it was really close. Olya worried about taking her family to church building, which was near the sea, and Russian ships, but options were limited. On February 27th, the congregation headed Sunday worship. Afterwards, 2 members asked Minister Alexander Poletsky, Sasha, for a ride to the center of the city since cabs were no longer going there. The route took them past the Azovstal steel plant, where they came under fire. Poletsky was struck on the head by either a bullet or shrapnel and spent several days in the hospital. He recuperated in his apartment until March 15th when church members brought him back to the building. A day later, his apartment was destroyed. A nightmarish pattern emerged. Days began at 6:40 a.m. with Russian songs blasted from loudspeakers. Ukrainian troops often responded with gunfire. Then came a blaring announcement. The forces of Russia and the Donetsk People's Republic demanded that you give up. The church members chuckled as they recited the script. After the instructions on how to surrender, 5 minutes of quiet followed. Then the shelling began. Dust filled the air. Always there was the smell of smoke, Shinya said. Everything was black. Everything was burning. The church lost electricity and water. They'd leased part of the building to a cell phone company, which set up an antenna on the roof. They disconnected it, fearing it might be a target for Russian bombers. The antenna held backup batteries the church members used to charge their phones. But there was no signal, no way to communicate with the outside world. Water was scarce. They rationed it as best they could. We couldn't wash ourselves. We couldn't shave. We couldn't flush the toilet, Jinya said. It's either your child's life or brush your teeth. They grabbed what food they had before they left their apartments. Alexei, one of the church's ministers, made fires outside and cooked. Often he went in and out through a window to avoid gunfire on the opposite side of the building. Soldiers from the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic took control of the area around the church building. Donetsk, a city in far eastern Ukraine, was seized by pro-Russian separatists in 2014. The fighting near the church building became less intense, but the dangers remained. On 3 occasions, Donetsk soldiers came to the building. They broke the windows and demanded the women and children leave. They also attempted to seize the cars in the church parking lot. The church members prayed silently. Then we told them, "No, we have kids, we have elderly. We're going to leave at some point," Olya said, so they didn't take our cars. "We didn't go anywhere or do anything without prayer," she added. Before venturing out to forage for supplies, the Christians asked God to grant them safety. Then they opened the door. They heard gunfire. They decided that God said no this time. When they were able to leave, the church members saw the effects of the 3-month siege. Roads were unnavigable. Buildings were unrecognizable, and bodies were everywhere. People were digging graves next to the road, Sasha said. By a massive hole, someone had written, 58 people are buried here. And there were so many of those holes, Olya said. Once the church members passed a man digging a grave that was too short for an adult, they asked him if it was for a child. "No," the gravedigger said, "it was for a man. The shrapnel had cut him in half." The Christians experienced small acts of kindness outside their churches' walls. A liquor store owner gave them the few candies and cookies he had in the shop for the kids. Some of the Russian soldiers they encountered were from Chechnya, a predominantly Muslim republic that endured years of bombardment in the 90s as rebels and their attempted separate from Russia. The Chechens gave the Christians small rations of water and told them what streets to avoid. Back in the building, the church members had morning Bible classes. One of the preachers said they'd be going through the Gospel of Mark. Mark is 16 chapters. I don't want to be here for 16 days, Olya thought. The time we studied Mark, we studied the 10 chapters of Revelation. And we still hadn't gone anywhere. We studied 31 chapters of Proverbs. We studied Isaiah, Ecclesiastes. Day after day, Sasha stood in the auditorium and read the scripture out loud. Alexei and other church members prepared humble meals from what little they had. Often as they gathered to eat, gunfire forced them back into the hallway. It was torture, Alexei said, knowing that the few morsels they had were going just feet away, getting cold. They kept reading, they kept praying and singing as loud as they could as the noise of the battle intensified. That's how we lived for 51 days. On day 51, workers at a nearby maternity hospital who had been supplying the church members with diapers and a few other essentials said they were leaving. The soldiers came to the building and said the area was being liquidated. They had to leave. A few other members had left the building. Some had decided to stay in Mariupol. 21 were still in the church building. They piled in the 4 cars and headed east to the city of Donetsk. From there, they entered Russia and made the long journey from Rostov-on-Don north to St. Petersburg. Members of the Church of Christ in both cities housed and provided for the refugees during their exodus. From Russia, they crossed into Estonia, a European nation on the Baltic Sea, and once was a part of the Soviet Union. They worshipped at the Church of Christ in Estonia, capital Tallinn, before making their way to Sopot, where longtime missionary Molly DeWidow and her daughter Annabelle had worked with city officials and Polish church members to renovate their building into a dormitory for Ukrainian refugees. "This is paradise," Olya said, looking around the kitchen of the apartment served as her temporary home. She and her fellow survivors, her husband Zhenya, her son and daughter, ministers, Alexei and Sasha shared smiles and even laughter as they recalled those countless moments when they huddled in the hallway. One of the young church members, Maxime, was reading scripture while the bombs were exploding, but he was far too quiet. They yelled at him, "Read louder, Maxime!" "Right now we're telling these stories in 2 minutes, and it's funny," Alexei said, but at the time it was so stressful, it was so long. Sadness is never far away. Olya and Zhenya's oldest 32-year-old Dima was one of the 25 volunteers attempting to deliver aid in Mariupol when they were captured by Russian forces. The family recently learned that Dmitry is alive but still in prison in Russia. I do have good news. He was released in a prisoner swap, and he is now in Germany. Sasha, meanwhile, recently learned that his adult daughter, whom he had lost contact, died in Mariupol. Though safe now from danger, the church members in Poland would soon be parting ways. Just a few hours after the interview, Olya and her family would leave for Germany, where they had found a place to stay, perhaps a place to start a new life. It's hard because we have to separate. Olya said, "It's so very hard. We lost everything there, and now we're starting to lose our spiritual family." Alexei cut her off. "No," he said, "we're not losing each other, not Mariupol, our Mariupol spiritual family. Regardless of where the coming months and years will take them," he said, "we're always going to be together till death." And here's some pictures of the church. This is in Rostov-on-Don. This is in Poland. And this is the baptism. Anyway, when we're reading these stories and hearing about the people who have lost everything, who instantly lost everything they owned. Their homes were completely obliterated. They lost their cars. They lost everything. They were forced out of their homes. And we look at our life and we think, and we're afraid of, getting rid of our toaster. Right? Like, we have so much, and we get to give it away the way we want to, and we get to minimize our life the way we want to. And their example and their spirit of love and their dedication has really challenged us, that God is gently leading us down a path that we cannot ignore. He put it in our heart to go to Ukraine, knowing that Putin was going to invade. He knew. God knew that Putin was going to invade. And we were planning on heading there. And we had two choices. We could stop, just say, well, we'll just stay here. We'll just continue our life the way it is. Or we could see what else God has for us. And we began to ask around people who might know of some place that could use a family that minimally trained in mission work, some people who had a life of love and service for the church and children, and that might be able to be useful somewhere. And we called and talked to Gary Jackson, my AIM coordinator, and he suggested Albania. When we started down that path, we saw doors open all over the place, and people who were encouraging us to go, and people were excited about us coming. And when we went on this trip, people were enthusiastic. You can see Ukraine, Russia. There's Albania. It's a little bitty place. We were in the center of Albania, and we drove up north about 2.5 hours, and suddenly we were like at the border of the next country. It was a very strange feeling. I think it would be even less if we had driven to the left as Macedonia, Greece, right across the water from Italy. Tirana is the star city in the middle. That's the capital. There's a lot of stuff happening there. It's very busy. We were thinking primarily that, to start off with that we would work there. There's something very similar to Let's Start Talking, a little more developed, called WEI, World English Institute, using English to teach people the gospel through the Bible. And they said people start off really interested in the English side of things, but before very long, you're having debates and conversations about the Bible side of things. And there have been it was encouraging to me to meet people who had been baptized 10 years or more ago, whose entire lives had been changed because of the stuff that they learned from that. When we started talking to them about working in Tirana, they were like, well, yes, that's a very good work. While we were there was a rotation of mostly retired people coming to visit Tirana, who were working with WEI. The bottom floor of the church building there is dedicated solely to this ministry, and students coming in and out, scheduled all throughout the week. They said what we really, really need is somebody in Berat. If you look straight down from Tirana under the word Albania, there's the word Berat. Berat is in the mountains, and it has a beautiful castle and this gorgeous old city of, they call it a city of 1,000 windows. This is the church in Tirana. This is the third floor, the top floor. This is us on a Sunday morning singing in Albanian for the first time. God really worked that out. We weren't, Lufthansa messed up our tickets and we weren't supposed to get there, but we did, and that was only by the grace of God. This was a couple days later, we went down to Durrës, which was the seaside town on the edge. It's a beautiful ocean behind the kids. This is a kids' camp that they were holding. This is the couple, Chimmy and what's her name? I should have written it down. And these two people work with the church in Durrës and have been working with the church in Berat, and they desperately need some extra help. This is the church camp, the kids' camp. They had gotten a special grant from Missions Without Borders to have a bunch of hotel rooms in this hotel that served all their meals and everything, so they were able to bring these kids without cost. This is the church building in Berat. It's the bottom floor of that unfinished building, behind those doors and behind that market. Very tiny. That's their auditorium. They're packing it every Sunday. There are probably over 40 people meeting. A lot of them are elderly, and they're all brand new Christians. They were all been baptized within the last year, and they are excited. And they talk about go invite your friends, and when they go, and they're like, where are we going to put them? Because they're looking for a bigger place for them. This is James teaching book of Romans to the group. And this is the scene from the top of the castle on the edge of the city, looking over the whole valley where all these people live. Pretty incredible experience. Yes. 60,000. We looked it up. We keep calling it the Albanian Homer because it's kind of... but a Homer only has 6,000. Yes. So Chimmy is standing in the doorway there, and he's translating for him. Sometimes, so these are baby Christians, absolutely brand new Christians. On Sunday, he preached a lesson on Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and they had never heard the story before. So when he was talking, like there was a lot of like tittering of people like, did you hear that? Like, do you turn their neighbors? Because it was all new information. And I mean, these are just brand new Christians. They lived during the time that the Russians and Soviets were under control. They were under control of a very evil dictator who did horrible things. Yes, and there was no faith. There was no avenue. The Russia kind of preserved the Orthodox a little bit, but here there was none. They choose their religion based on what it will. They joke and say when they went to forced labor, they all claim to be Muslim, but when it comes tax time, they claim to be Christians or something. They all just base it on basically on what they think they need at the time. James is going to do a presentation in a week and explain more about what we would be doing there, how we could be useful. We met some really awesome people. We were very encouraged, and they very much need more workers. We're excited about this call of God. We do not know what God has planned for us. The way I see it, there's no failure in this. We go, for a year, and it's not the direction our family needs to go for our kids' health or whatever. There's no failure. We are following a path, and we ask for you to pray for our strength and courage to do what we see God putting in front of us. And so, yeah. When I talked to Gary Jackson, I just said, I don't feel qualified. I don't feel like experienced enough. And he said, the fields are white. He's like, the fields are white. We need workers. If you feel like you can be a worker in any way, go be a worker. You don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to be super experienced and skilled. Go be a worker. And that verse has just really comforted my heart because there's a lot of imposter syndrome going on. I don't feel qualified, but the fields are white. And so, yes, Tanya.
Andrea, I just have to say this, that back when I sort of first met you, when you were in AIM and we had blogs, when people were in blogs, your blog was named In White Fields. Yep.
It was. Yep. It was. I'm probably.
That's always been kind of your passion.
Yep. Anyway, this is a sign we saw on the chip. I thought it would be a nice ending. So careful, Virgo. We're being careful. We're following God's lead, and I look forward to hearing how James explains more of that later. So.